read in last week's parsha, there were 42 cities given to the Levim. In addition to those, and each city, in a certain context, had a status of an ir miklot, that if a person would kill inadvertently, and he knew that was the city of the Levi, if he went there to seek refuge, the avenger of the blood was not permitted to kill him. However, there were an additional 6 cities, which were designated as the Ori Miklot, which was specifically to protect the inadvertent killer from the avenger of the blood. Those additional 6 cities protected the person if he went there, whether he went there with intention to be protected or not, the city protected him. But in number, altogether, there were 48 cities given to the Levim. 48 cities. We had mentioned a number of times that when Yisro had gone out to the desert to become part of Klal Yisrael, he had brought with him Tzipora, Moshe's wife, and his 2 children. Yisro says to Moshe, if you come out to greet me, fine. But for whatever reason you don't want to come out to greet me, you should come out on behalf of your wife. And if your wife is not sufficient, you should come out on behalf of your 2 children. So Moshe had a quandary, which we're not going to discuss right now. Why yes, why not? So Hashem says to Moshe, you go out on behalf of Yisro. Why should you go out on behalf of Yisro? That because he abandoned idolatry to become a convert, therefore you should go out on his behalf. That's why you should go out. He's worthy. You should go out on his behalf. And when Moshe went out on his behalf, Moshe went out to greet him, and anybody who saw Moshe going out, which was Aaron and his children, of course, followed. And there's a cane of the elders. If they saw Moshe, Aaron, and his children going out, the elders followed. And then the heads of the great numbers, and then all Jews, all Klal Yisrael went out to greet Yisro, to acknowledge Yisro is coming into the desert. That's the Medrash. So the Medrash says, why should you greet him? Because he converted. And we find that idolatry is mentioned 48 times in the Torah. The laws pertain to idolatry in some form or shape. And the laws of Gerus, of conversion, in some context, are mentioned 48 times. So because he left the idolatry, which is 48, to become a Jew through conversion, therefore he's worthy and deserving. You should go acknowledge him. You should go out and greet him. That's the Medrash. He abandoned 48 to become part of something which is represented 48 times in the Torah. So then we had mentioned in the last parak of Pirkei Avos, the Mishnah discusses the Torah is acquired in its entirety through 48 ways. Meaning, if you fall short of the 48 ways, although you acquire Torah, nevertheless, but in terms of its totality, to be fully invested or absorbed in Torah, one must enter on 48 levels. Then you're fully engulfed with the Torah. Now, what is the antithesis of Kedusha? The most extreme level of opposition to Kedusha, that's idolatry. Idolatry is you believe God has nothing to do with this world. The world is dictated and controlled by deities. Even if the person believed that God may have been the creator, but he left existence and he gave it over to the deities, that's idolatry. Person that is an idolatry has no connection to God. So when we speak about Barosi Yisro, Barosi Torah Tavlin, Hashem says, I created the evil inclination. Evil inclination has many manifestations, but the most extreme manifestation of the evil inclination is where he cuts you off totally from Hashem. That's idolatry. So if idolatry is mentioned 48 times, and the Torah is the antidote to contend with that opposition. So what is the Torah saying by mentioning 48 times? You have to address it, and the only antidote is Torah. So if you are invested in Torah on 48 levels, then you've invested sufficiently to be able to contend with whatever the representation of idolatry is. It's 48 versus 48. Therefore, how many levels does one have to invest and develop and evolve and be impacted? 48 levels, which are fully enumerated in the Mishnah. Now, who is considered who is designated as the disseminator of Torah, the Klal Yisrael? We find in Pashas Bracha, before Moshe passes away, he blesses every one of the tribes. What does he say to Levi? Ulevi Omar. To Levi he said, Yoro Mishpatecha Yaakov. You will disseminate Mishpatecha Yaakov. You will disseminate Torah. So who is the disseminator of Torah, the Klal Yisrael? Who is designated? That's Levi. How many cities did Levi have? 42 plus 6. 48 cities. So what does Levi represent? Levi is the representation of the dissemination of Torah. As a result of that, he's represented as 48. He represents when Moshe Rabbeinu said after the Chet Egel, Mi l'Shem Eli. Here the Luchas Rishonos were smashed. That was a total severance from Hashem. And Moshe says, for the reinstatement, what do we have to do? We have to kill the idolaters. And he said, Mi l'Shem Eli. Every member of the tribe of Levi stood with Moshe and did what they have to do. They are the opposition to what happened. So what does Levi represent? Levi represents the 48. So the 48, although Levi has no share in the land, because Hashem hu nachloso, as the Torah says, that's why he has no share in the land, because Hashem is his portion. Therefore, he's the representation of 48, which is the Torah itself, and therefore he's the only one who's able to be the antithesis and be the counterforce for idolatry. Therefore, the cities, 48 cities, Gerus is 48, and therefore the Pasuk, the Gemara explains, such a Pasuk in Malachi, that Sifsei Kohen Yishmu Das, Yevakish Torah Piu, the lips of the Kohen, or the keepers of the faith, you should seek out Torah from his mouth, Ki Malach Hashem Tzvadosu, because he is the equivalent of Malach Hashem Tzvadosu, he's like an angel. And because he's like an angel, which is his only objective, just as an angel, its only purpose is only do the will of Hashem and not veer from them. The Kohen is identically the same thing. He's not involved in worldly pursuits. He has no share in the land. His main emphasis is Yor Mishpecha Yaakov. So it's 48 versus 48. Therefore, we had 48 Orei HaLeviyim. So over here, the Balaturim, at the beginning of Dvorim, writes, Ela Dvorim, Dvorim HaDvorim, it's Dvorim, then this HaDvorim, Ela HaDvorim. So therefore, the word Ela Dvorim represents three. There's Dvorim, then it's Ela HaDvorim, and there's HaDvorim. Remez, Robas Gimel Pomim Nemru, B'Sinai. It's a remez. Gimel Pomim Nemru. The Torah was mentioned 3 times, meaning entering into the bris, into the covenant. B'Sinai, V'nishlu B'ol Moed, V'nishlu B'Arvus Moed. A 3rd time, it was repeated at Arvus Moed, right now before they went into Eretz Yisrael. V'al kol mitzvah, Nichrosu Yud Gimel Brisos B'Sinai. Every mitzvah, there were 16 covenants at Sinai, V'yudvav B'ol Moed, V'yudvav B'Arvus Moed, and another 16 in Arvus Moed. Shehi Memches. So how many brisos, if you add up Sinai, Ol Moed, and Arvus Moed, how many covenants did we enter into for every mitzvah? Memches. Okay? There were 48 covenants, which we entered in, the 3 junctures, Sinai, Ol Moed, Arvus Moed, each 16 for each mitzvah. That's 48. And we find the Torah forewarns us regarding Avodah Zorah 48 times. Well, Torah besides this Medrash Tanchuma, and we find the Torah commands us regarding how do we have to deal with the ger. V'ahavtas hager, you must love the ger. You should not aggrieve him. All the laws. Shabbat lidovik b'Torah, the ger who came to cleave to the Torah. Shenichsu alei memches brisos. The reason why ger is mentioned 48 times, the laws of gerus, because he abandoned idolatry to enter into the Torah, which we experienced and were connected to through 48 brisos. Bereshis, ve'elo, ve'yikra, ve'yidaber, eler. The five chumoshim. Bereshis, eler, shmos, ve'yikra, ve'yidaber, which is Bamidbar, and now we have Elah Dvarim, Sof Tevos. If you take the last letter of each of the Chumoshim, the Gematria Yiras. The Gematria is the same Gematria as Yiras. What does that mean? So Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem. It's the same numerical value. The Torah, the last letter of each of the Chumoshim, the numerical value is the same as Yiras to allude Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem, Ubegematria Torah. And the same Gematria Torah, Rashi Tevos Shel Heichel Mishim Torah. Beis Vov 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 Aleph Gematria Eya. Okay? Whatever, it keeps going. But again, we see this concept. There are 48 brisos. You know, it's interesting, the Ramban writes, what's the difference between a shvuah and a bris? Hashem takes an oath, or Hashem enters with us into a covenant. A shvuah is with God, when Hashem makes an oath, he will do this, he will do that. If we don't meet certain criteria, the oath is not in effect. But a bris, if Hashem enters with us into a bris, ain't sure. God will not back out. Even if we fail, Hashem is committed to the bris. Hashem made a bris with the Avos HaKadoshim. He entered into a covenant. Es brisi Yaakov, es brisi Yitzchok, es brisi Avram. To give us the land. The land is ours no matter what. We may be put out for a while, but the land that will not be violated. That contract is an eternal contract. How many brises were there? 48. The 48 correspond to Torah. Yiras Hashem, Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem. The only nation which has relevance to Torah, Bereshis Bara Elokim Yisrael V'Soretz, is only Klal Yisrael. Yisro Shnikras Reishis, Torah Nikras Reishis. Even at the end of time, when the Goyim are going to say, why don't you put a mountain over our heads? And Hashem responds, and they don't give up, because they want to have a piece of eternity at the end of time. And Hashem proves to them. The story, conclusion is the Gemara regarding Sukkah. Hashem says to them, mitzvah kali yeshli. I have an easy, simple mitzvah. So Rashi says, what's the easy mitzvah? It doesn't cost much, and it's easy to put together. And all the Goyim, at the end of time, it hasn't happened yet. They're all going to build sukkahs. And they go into the sukkah, and Hashem is motzi cham in artiko. Hashem takes the sun out of the sheath, and it's a scorching hot day. And the Goyim, they run out of the sukkah. So you see that they cannot tolerate the mitzvah under all circumstances. So the Gemara asks, but there's halacha, mitzvah potim in sukkah, that if a person is in distress, is in pain, you're not supposed to stay in the sukkah. So the Gemara explains, when a Jew leaves the sukkah, when he's mitzvah, he doesn't kick the sukkah, doesn't leave with disgust. The Goyim, when they leave the sukkah, they're going to leave it with disgust. That's the difference between the Jew and the Goy. And that's going to be the final nail in the coffin of the nations of the world, why they have no relevance to eternity, and they have no relevance to have a relation with Hashem. So again, it's 48 brisos. There's no shear. A bris isn't, you cannot violate. Hashem will not, under any circumstance, back off a bris. And he entered specifically that, knowing that the connection to us cannot ever be severed for that reason. How many travels did we have in the Midbar? We had 42 travels. So the base cities of the Levim were 42. It's interesting. 42 travels, 42 cities of refuge. Cities given to the Levi, which in addition had this characteristic that it was able to protect the person who killed inadvertently. What was the 42 stops? When we stopped, why did we stop 42 times? The Torah makes it a point that when we traveled, all these travels 42 times, there were times we stayed there for years. There were times we stayed there for a day or two. They would erect a Mishkan. We were there 2 days. Immediately, there were the trumpets were blown. The cloud was moving. They had to dismantle everything, and they moved. And they go to somewhere else for a month. What's all these movements continuously? So we mentioned the Orach Chaim HaKadosh explains, as Rav Chaim Kalatsky explained, he says the last stopover before the coming of Mashiach is going to be the Western Hemisphere, North America. Why? Because he explains that when Hashem created the world was peppered with the Nitzotzi Kedusha, sparks of holiness, Kedusha. The Klal Yisrael themselves have to be at certain locations to extract from the world these Nitzotzi Kedusha, these sparks of holiness, and it becomes absorbed in our neshamas. It becomes part of Klal Yisrael. The Sod V'Shesh Avoda writes, I mentioned it many times, Sod V'Shesh Avoda, that there's a word from the Shalom Kodesh. Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael, Lo ala lechem levad yichya adam. The person doesn't only live on bread. Ki al motzi pi Hashem yichya adam. It's through the words of Hashem, man lives. What does that mean? Kol al lechem levad yichya adam. El al pi motzi Hashem yichya adam. So he explains the Shalom Kodesh. A human being is a composite. A human being is comprised of the physical and the spiritual. So we understand bread, which is the staple of life, it's material. So the bread, whatever it is, it's makeup, it's physical makeup, the carbohydrates, what it's made of, that sustains the physicality of the person. But what sustains the neshama? So he explains in every food item, the nitzotzi kedusha, which are absorbed into the neshama. So he explains it this way. If a person eats l'shem shamayim, you eat for the sake of Hashem. What's the sake of Hashem? The Rambam writes in Hilchos Deos that a Jew has a chiyuv, has an obligation to maintain his physical health. Why? What's the reason? This is not a plug for Alan, okay? So why does a Jew have an obligation to protect his health? Because you can only have a healthy mind if you have a healthy body. Because if a person is suffering from ailments and has pains, ailments and pain is a distraction. And to be able to focus sufficiently, you can't be distracted. So you have an obligation to maintain your health to your best ability, not to be distracted. Because you have to have that mind to be able to advance spiritually. So he writes, if you eat l'shem shamayim, you eat that food to maintain your health for the sake of Hashem, that it's a means, it's not an end. So when the process of eating, it's a due process. You absorb the food in your system. So the physical aspect of that food provides for the physical nourishment. But the nitzotzi kedusha, the sparks of holiness in that's absorbed into your neshama. What about if a person doesn't eat l'shem shamayim? You eat physically, just for the physical value, it's recycled. Just as the waste leaves the body, after it extracts whatever it needs, the nitzotzi kedusha leave the body together with the waste. It goes out together. But if a person eats l'shem shamayim, he absorbs it. And all that leaves the body is only the physical waste, but not the what? Not the nitzotzi kedusha. That's the Yisro V'Shesh based on the Zohar. That's lo alechem levad yichya adam. Hashem, he created bread that has a dual characteristics. It has the physical characteristic, it has the spiritual characteristic. However, to be able to benefit from the spiritual, you have to connect on a spiritual level. What's the spiritual level? L'shem shamayim. You eat for the sake, as Shlomo Melech says in Mishlei, tzaddik ochel l'sov nafsho. When a tzaddik eats, he only eats to save his neshama. That's the only reason. Meaning, it's a means. It's not an end. That's the value of eating. But how do you achieve that? How do you achieve that? Reishis chochem yiras Hashem. Barasi yitzer barasi Torah tavlin. The Torah is the antidote to that. That's the only thing. Mesil Sham writes, Rav Kalatsky writes, and Mesil Shorim. You go to a doctor, and he prescribes a specific type of medication. Because the doctor has an understanding of the illness, the disease, and understands only this medication is able to deal with that disease. And the person goes and he chooses some other, whatever he eats, some other herb, which has no relevance to the disease. So the doctor says, why don't you follow my direction? He says, I thought this would do it. He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our creator. Barasi Yetzirah, I created that entity. There's only one way to deal with that. There's no other way. The only way to deal with that Yetzirah, to incapacitate it. In Torah, is only through Torah itself. But of course, when do you totally incapacitate it? Memches Dvorim. Avodah Zarah is mentioned 48 times in the Torah. Torah and the most fleshed out level, it's Memches Dvorim Shatorah Niknas Mem. So if you meet it head to head, then it's the true tablet. It's an antidote, you incapacitate the Gemara. So it cites many psukim that the Yisro is the equivalent of metal. He's a stone, metal, just you smash it, the stone, one melts, like water, whatever it is. Whatever the Yisro, whatever guise he comes to you, the Torah has within it the ability to what? To totally incapacitate it. We find it's in Schoras Alavuchos at the end of this, in the 6th parak in Pirkei Avos. Al tikri choras el cherus. Ein l'cha ben chorin el mi she'osik b'Torah. The only one who's ben chorin is the one who engages in Torah study. Osik b'Talmud Torah. What does that mean? What is a ben chorin? Ben chorin means you have control. You're a free man. You have nobody controlling your life. So when are you in control of your own life? Cherus, chorus, choros alaluchos. What is the heart? The heart is the location for all passion, all desires. If you put in that heart Torah, the passion of the heart is Torah. You leave the heart empty, it's vacant, its passion is what? Only physicality. So how do you somehow push out that there's no room for the Yetzer Hara? You fill the heart with Torah. You fill it with Torah, but how do you fill it? To bring it in at that level. Once you do pull it in, that's totally in its totality. It counters the what? The 48 times the Avodah Zarah is mentioned in Torah. That's Elad Borim. But it says the last letter of each one of the Chomoshim numerically is Yiras. Reishis Chochma is Yiras Hashem. Everything has to be predicated on Yerushalayim, and Yerushalayim means, we know Yerushalayim doesn't mean only Yiras HaOnish. The Ramban writes, Yiras HaOnish is what? Is for Noshim, the Elodim, the children. Yiras HaRomos, Yiras Chet, or there are many other levels of Yiro. That's already a more understanding of what it is. There you're addressing why you have fear. It's not your fear of punishment. Fear of punishment is for yourself. Yiras HaOnish, Yiras Chet, or Yiras HaRomos is because you have an understanding of who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. It tells us in 2 places in Shas, what's the reason why was Bayis Rishon destroyed? So the Gemara tells us in Yuma, it was destroyed because of Gimel and Shlosha Averos. There were 3 cardinal sins. That's why it was destroyed. The Gemara we had above Mitzvah and the Gemara in Yuma, later says, cites a posuk Necho, which we read on Tisha B'Av, Lama of the Oretz. They asked, why was the land destroyed? Lama of the Oretz, Al Ozo Mistorosi. That the reason why we were driven out, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and the Babylonians, they conquered themselves, Lama of the Oretz, Al Ozo Mistorosi. So the Gemara explains, what is Ozo Mistorosi? Al Ashel Birchu B'Torah Tchiba. Of course, when they study Torah, it wasn't predicated on Birchas Torah. Whether Birchas Torah is a Drabanan, whether it's Doraisa, it's a question among the Rishonim. The obligation to say Birchas Torah before you learn is the Torah obligation, only rabbinical. Okay. Since this famous Rabbeinu, there's a Ran in the Dorim, above Mitzvah, who cites Rabbeinu Yonah Chosid. That's the Shari Tshuva. Rabbeinu Yonah Chosid. It says they went and they couldn't figure out Lama of the Oretz. And they went and asked the Nevi'im, they asked the Chachomim, they asked, nobody could answer Lama of the Oretz. And then they came to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Hashem says, you know why of the Oretz? Alozu Misporosi. They abandoned my Torah. That's why the land was destroyed. And what does that mean? Lo Birch B'Torah Tchila. So the Ran over there cites the Rabbeinu Yonah, who says, if you go to the Beis Medrash, to the Botei Medrash, they were packed. 3 o'clock in the morning, it was teeming. Shavuos night, you had shurim not only for men, for women. All kinds of shurim, right? You go to New Jersey, all the communities, 3 o'clock. And when I grew up, women who slept that night, Shavuos night. Today, they outdo the men. Lama of the Oretz. He explains, why couldn't they figure it out? If Jews weren't learning, it's obvious why of the Oretz. The answer is Jews were learning. But when they learned, they didn't learn for the right reason. The emphasis was on the intellectualism. It was not luminamas lasos. It wasn't to learn to perform and serve Hashem at that special level. What was the proof of the pudding? They did not predicate it on Birchas Torah. They did not study the Torah in the proper mindset, the right l'shem shamayim. As a result of that, that's the reason for the Oretz. I asked the question. It's a contradiction. The Gemara says in Yuma, the reason why it was destroyed because it's the Gimel Averos. Giler Ashur Avodah. And here the Gemara tells us in 2 locations, although they studied, they didn't study with the right mindset. How do we reconcile the two? So I once mentioned there's a Maral. The Maral Prague says the term Torah, where does the word Torah come from? The Torah is Chachmas Hashem, but yet it's coined Torah because Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael, Joseph Brocha, Torah Tziv Lo Moshe Akilas Yaakov. The quantification of Torah is Torah. He says Torah is Yorah. Comes the word direction. Yorah Mishpechah Yaakov. It's a way of life. If you study Torah where you don't integrate it, that it becomes a way of life, it's not Torah. That's called Chochmah. I've created the evil inclination, the only antidote to incapacitate. It has to be Torah. What's Torah? Torah's luminam lasos. That's where it's integrated, it becomes part of your life. So if it's bircha b'Torah tchila, then it wards off, it incapacitates Torah. If not, you know where you fall to. You could be studying Torah day and night. You could become an idolater, you can become a murderer, and you could become an adulterer and do everything under the sun. And it's not a contradiction. Because one, it's the emphasis is on the intellectualism. It's not on the essence of Torah, which is luminam naslasos. That's the essence of Torah. That's how you reconcile the Gemara in the Dorim, above Mitzvah, the Gemara in Yuma. So it's the 3 cardinal sins, and they couldn't figure it out. It doesn't make any sense. If Torah is the antidote, why people crossing those lines? It should not happen. Hashem says, you know why? Oh, and he says, Rabbeinu, only Hashem knew this, because only Hashem knows what was in their hearts. It was lacking in the commitment that it should be integrated as it Yoro Mishpech Liyak, that it's Torah, because it wasn't Torah, therefore it didn't provide that counterforce to incapacitate the Torah. It was an 11-day trip from Chorev is Sirai, Derech HaSeir. If you would take the route through Har Seir, which we In the 40th year, they wanted to go through the territory of Edom. He didn't let them through. And they had to encircle it. And that's what we were confronted with Og and Sichon. It would have taken 11 days. So Rashi says, Moshe, look what you caused. We wandered 40 years. We could have gone from Sinai. When we left Sinai, 11 days, we could have been in Eretz Yisrael. It's 11-day trek. That's all it takes. And that 11-day trek, you were able to make that distance in 3 days. Makes the calculation. Quotes, okay, yeah, makes the calculation. The Shechina was so bent, was so involved, consumed on your behalf. Lamar b'yaskim loretz, to hurry you into the land. Ubishvil shel kilkaltem, heser eschem sigos harseir abon shalom. 40 years we were encircling Harseir. 40 years. You could have been there in 3 days. But the last day, somehow we messed up. You know, you always find out, and this repeats itself. When we reach a watershed moment, somehow we mess up. We're about to go in, mess up. The 40th year, we're about to go into Eretz Yisrael. What happens? They start complaining. The Balpor, we could have been destroyed. The Lechem HaKlokel, we start complaining about the Mon. And Hashem sends vipers to bite us. And they were dying. Whenever there's a moment where there's going to be a transition to another level, there's always a kitruk. There's always prosecution because nothing's perfect. And Satan comes and he challenges us. And we've mentioned many times, we find by the Akedah, that Satan tried to stop Avram Avinu from going to the Akedah. Because he knew if he would succeed, this would be a schus for Klal Yisrael, that whenever he would prosecute at whatever level, the schus of the Akedah will silence him. And that's Rosh Hashanah. Although it's the Yom Adin, the schus of the Shofar Shel Hayol silences it. We had mentioned, the Rambam rules in Hilchos Tshuva that if a person is a tzaddik his whole life, and at the end of his life he's toeh al rishonos, and he regrets that he ever did a mitzvah in his life, the whole record is wiped out. They don't even mention an iota of his mitzvahs. If you say, I'm not interested, I regret I did it, it's gone. What happened after the Akedah? Avraham Avinu was ecstatic. He succeeded. And HaKadosh Baruch says to him, you're on top. You have nothing to worry about because you did not withhold your son from me. And the Ayil is in the place of Yitzchok. When he comes on, what does he find out? He finds out, as a result of the Akedah, Sari Menu passes away. Could you imagine? Sari Menu was his partner in Kiruv. Avram Megayros HaNoshim. Sora is Megayros HaNoshim. In Nevuah, Sari Menu was greater than Avram Avinu. And why did she die? Because Satan came and informed her what was about to happen. So if a person would be an ordinary person, even an exceptional person, comes back, here I just accomplished the ultimate, and what was the cost factor? His wife dies. And his wife, Sari Menu, was his partner to the nth degree. It was a very serious challenge. What would have been, Avraham Avinu would say, something, if that's what happens, that's the thank you. I regret I ever went to the Akedah. If Avraham Avinu would have ever said, I regret that I ever went to the Akedah, you know what happens to the Akedah? It's like it never happened. And that's exactly what Satan wanted to do. He created a challenge that regardless of what you think where you're at, you never know where you're at. Because chas v'sholom, al tamid ba'atzmai yoimosto, You can't believe in yourself till you die, because even if you're tzaddik till the end, if the last moment you Torah Rishonos, the record's wiped out. And someone has that ability to wipe it out the last moment. So whenever you're holding at a certain point, somehow he's the monk you mentioned in the equation. He disrupts everything. Chizkiah Melech Yehuda was supposed to be Mashiach. Midas Adin comes and says, but he didn't say Shira. HaKadosh Baruch says, if that's the case, he's not Mashiach. There's always a kitrug at the last moment. We're about to go into Exodus, there's a kitrug. We have Luchas Rishonos. What happens? Moshe Rabbeinu goes, he's delayed. He's not even, it was a miscalculation. All of a sudden, they're involved with idolatry. The Erev Rav introduces the Egel. Why this moment? We were nearly there. If that would have happened, the world would have reached Shleimus. Because whenever we're at that watershed moment, there's always something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows the sun to enter, and we should have to meet challenges which are totally beyond, beyond our capacity, but very difficult challenges. Okay, we'll stop here at Chumash and we'll do the halacha. Well, have a